Thank you very much for coming. I'm Patrice Keat, the founder and director of the Santa Cruz Children's Museum of Discovery. And if you haven't been there, we're in the Capitola Mall. Bring kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, whatever. We're open all the time. We're in the former Abercrombie and Fitch space. And not all the time, 10 to 5 every day. And you can check out our website, and we have a flyer so you can find out what we do. We have 8,000 square feet of exhibit space with a variety of exhibits. And we have programs every day. So come visit us, and if anyone ever wants to volunteer, my name is on here, I believe, so you can find me. We have been doing this program for between 4 and 5 years. Every first Thursday of the month, we have a presentation, and we're really excited about this evening. So pick up a flyer on your way. And just a little, we'll remind you at the end too, but next month, October 4th, we have April Silver and Martin Gaskell, and April's here, right, doing a presentation on musical glass, which I can't wait. Science, art and science of acoustics. So same time, 6:30 to 8. And we'll be putting it on out in the public in case you forget. So thank you for coming, and I want to thank our panelists, and I'm introducing the panel moderator, Margaret Leonard, who is a native of Santa Cruz and has been interested in nature and bird watching all of your life, right? And I know, because I've been with her on trips, that she loves sharing her enthusiasm for birding and capturing birds through art, both photography and in drawing, all ages. She can engage 3-year-olds up to my age, so. And she maintains a yard list and enjoys traveling to seek out a variety of birds. So thank you, Margaret, for putting our panel together.
Well, thank you, Patrice, and for volunteering me, since I am an enthusiastic birder, but I don't have the expertise to really speak on many topics other than, like you said, my enthusiasm and love of birds. So tonight we're going to be delving into a little more science about birds, so I'm going to learn a ton, and I hope all of you do too. So we have 2 great speakers, both of them from the Santa Cruz Bird Club, which is a wonderful organization. Even if you never go to the meetings, which I would have to say I don't, but I get the newsletter and I get emails, and I stay abreast of what's happening here in Santa Cruz, because this is a very, very exciting and birdy place to live. And the more you travel and the more you go to other bird destinations, which I love to do, but I love to come home and go, wow, we have it all here. So I hope you get energized and start enjoying the birds even more than you may do already. And so I'm happy to have, we're going to have 2 speakers tonight. Carol Pecot, who is going to give the who, why, what, and where background on bird migration, bird calls, and really some interesting topics. And then Stephanie Singer is going to more directly talk about the Migratory Bird Treaty. And so between the 2 of them, I think we're going to become quite good about this topic. And as a very amateur birder, I can say that one of the most interesting things about birding, I find, mysterious until you learn more, is like, boy, those birds are just awesome. And then like a week later, they're gone. And I'm like, where did they go? Why did they leave? And then you wait for the next season, and then they show up again. And even at the beach, you get down there and there's thousands and thousands of shorebirds, and then a week later you go down there and where are they? So we're going to learn more about where they come, they go, and I used to get all disappointed and think horrible things had happened, but actually they had just moved on. So it's all good. So let me welcome Carol and put on her presentation. I'll be moderating in case anybody gets rowdy, you use too many questions, and we've been watching the hearings on TV, so I think I know what I'm doing. Unlimited number of questions allowed. So where'd Carol go? Here. Oh, there you go. There we go.
So, a confession, I have not done a It's very hard to hear you. Can you speak up a little louder, please?
I can. I'm a former teacher, so I can speak up louder. And taught junior high for a long time. And
you survived?
survived, yeah, and fun, they're fun. You know, they're sharks too, but they're also very fun. And I forced a lot of my students to learn birds, bird calls and bird identification. And they had to do 20 of each, and they did amazingly. And for some people, I had one mother run up and say, "You changed his life because now he," you know. So I really enjoy talking about birds and sharing about birds. So like I said, new on this PowerPoint thing, we'll see. I've got a lot of really cool information, and I'll even have to find out if I have to use my glasses or not. We'll find out. So bird migration. I want to start out with a quote. I confess, I am not sure where the quote came from. I will find it again someday, but it's a really good quote. For much of human history, it was people who depended on migrating birds for their survival, for meat, feathers, eggs. But the tables have turned, and now more than any other time in history, migratory birds are dependent on humans for their survival. And the choices we make are impacting the future of many migratory birds. So probably most everybody here has a general idea of what migration is. Wikipedia says the regular seasonal movement between breeding and wintering grounds. It's often north and south. It can also be high and low, like up and down a mountain, like the Andes or the Himalayas are common. It can also be between areas that have seasonal flooding. Basically, the birds are moving away from and then back to areas which are difficult to survive in during part of the year, but really great for raising families during the other part of the year. About half of the known bird species migrate in one way or another, and about 20% of the known bird species are what are called long-distance migrants. A lot of those long-distance migrants, even though they're flying hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of miles, they can come back to exactly the same location, the same yard, the same nest site, within a day or two of when they did the last year. It's truly amazing. So with all the migration going on, it's sort of weird to find out that for much of history, people really didn't know that birds migrated from place to place. They knew they were here sometimes, like you were saying, and then they weren't. But they didn't really know where they went when they left. There were some theories. This is a good one. Aristotle noted that several birds flew to warmer locations in winter, but he also thought that many of the birds, when they left, they would transmorgify into a different kind of a bird that then came, in like a week or so later. He also thought that swallows hibernated. He thought in trees on the ground, and then later on people were like, they go and hibernate in the mud at the bottom of lakes and rivers, packed like little sardines. And even fishermen, when they pull out their nets, sometimes they have sparrows. And you can see this is a fish, this is a sparrow, or a swallow, this is a swallow. Not exactly the right thought. In medieval times, this is a good one, a common explanation for barnacle geese arriving in winter was that they grew on trees, which look like barnacles, hanging over the water. There's one, being born right now. A fun thing on that was in the Irish in the 1100s, people were like, well, we can't have meat on Friday, but this came from a tree. We're going to eat barnacle geese. That's okay. So it was a little cheat there. There was even a theory in the 17th century that birds flew to the moon. That's why you didn't see them anymore until they came back. Now, it was the 1800s when we finally got some good proof when a person in Germany was out hunting. He killed a migrating white stork. he, tracked down the dead bird, found it with spear through its neck, which was surprising given that he had shot it with a gun. Here is the bird. This actually is the bird. They call it a arrow stork. So they took the spear to the local university. It was identified as being from Africa. That meant that this stork had been speared through the neck in Africa, then flown for thousands of miles to get over Germany to get shot again, or successfully. I mean, it's like pretty tragic. But the arrow stork and 25 others like that helped to give us a better understanding about the epic journeys that these birds are going on. So as we've developed more methods to actually track the birds on their journeys, we've learned a lot more about the amazing travels that they undertake. So, why do the birds migrate, and how do they migrate these huge distances and successfully end up on these exact places without using maps or, more modern, GPS? Because undertaking migration is really risky. Death by predators, by hunting, by exhaustion, by not having enough food are really real risks. The concentration from being in flocks increases the possibility of getting parasites or getting sick. So the benefits have to outweigh the risks for migration to be worth it. The basic answer to why is pretty simple. Food and water, weather, and raising families. If you eat bugs and plants, it doesn't make a lot of sense to stay around in the winter when the bugs and plants have died. Birds don't have the luxury of going to their local Safeway store to restock. Also, it's good to avoid freezing to death when you could just fly someplace warmer. Also, if you're having a hard time feeding yourself, you are no way going to be able to raise a family. So birds, like most of us, want to raise their family in a safe neighborhood and give their offspring a lot to eat. In the case of birds, however, a safe neighborhood just means one where it is less likely that your children are going to be eaten. So to achieve this, these are Arctic terns here with the longest migrations. They need to travel to places where they can find enough food to feed themselves part of the year, and then to places which are great for breeding and raising their young during other parts of the year. So back to the how do they do it. There's two parts. There's the navigation part, and there's the physical strategy for getting their body to there and then back again. We know that birds use both instinct and learning. Different birds use different amounts of each to time their migrations and to navigate. Long-lived social birds, like cranes and geese, learn their route by following their elders on their first migration. But all birds strongly rely on visual landmarks, like a river or mountains or whatever. That's an important part of their migration. A while back, whooping cranes they were trying to, as they were getting close to being extinct, they were trying to reintroduce them in some areas. So they successfully reintroduced a group of young whooping cranes in Wisconsin that they were going to then train to fly to Florida. They had no elders because they had gone extinct in that area. So I have a picture of the crane, the new crane flock, following an unusual elder who taught them their migration route. So they noticed his attractive crane outfit. And they had to use an ultralight because that was the only one that could go slow enough. And they successfully took the group followed their elder, dropped them off where they needed to be in Florida, and left them, and then they found their way back. And then started the new migration pathway, or restarted. So birds use sight, but they also have a lot of other tools in their toolbox. There's a great National Geographic things that have have, well, they just have wonderful, wonderful articles on migration. I got this from there. Scientists are hard at work to discover these other tools by using a lot of trickery. For example, using a real sun, as in the real sun, and a fake sun, a German scientist was able to prove that starlings used the sun as a compass. And they knew how to compensate for the different positions, for the different times of day and different times of year, and different seasons. Also, the sun sets in the west, of course, and when it sets, it creates some polarized light rays which happen to run north and south. So most migrating birds use that to recalibrate their compasses with the setting sun. An ecologist at Cornell University changed the orientation of the stars by putting indigo buntings into a planetarium. The birds would correctly orient, we're going this way, we're going this way, relative to whatever star orientation he would give them. And he found that they even recognized, it wasn't like it's the North Star, they recognized the major constellations so that if one of them was blocked off by the clouds, then they could look at the other. Let's look at Cassiopeia tonight to get going correctly. Another, after it was discovered that some birds have internal compasses, you may have heard that they have magnetite, many birds in their bill. Some of them actually have some sensors in their eyes where they can see magnetic fields. So this Danish scientist, he took wild thrushes from outdoors, put them in an outdoor cage, covered them so they couldn't see the setting sun to, orient their compass, and then they altered the magnetic field around the thrushes. I'm sure there was lots of electricity involved there. The thrushes flew off in the wrong direction until the next night when they could reorient, and then they righted their course and went. Yes, and then there's the pigeons. So pigeons, homing pigeons, they're used to carrying things. We have lots of them. This is a poor little homing pigeon with his little cap with the little wires inside the coil so they can change what his brain is experiencing as the local magnetic field. And they found, they would have them in cages and like, which way do they want to go? So they found on a sunny day when it could use the clues from sun, they would give it a counterclockwise current or a clockwise current, and they're all still sort of going, doesn't fool them much. But on an overcast day, when they can't orient to the sun, and then they're like, bing, flip the magnetic, I think they said that the birds were actually like flying, and then they would somehow change their direction. So you can see here, flip there. Homing pigeons, lots of experiments. Then there's the, what if the bird has to migrate from a place it has never been before kind of experiment? Some of our local white-crowned sparrows were captured over from San Jose. They were tagged, they were put on a plane, flown to Louisiana, and let go. They correctly migrated to their migration grounds in Alaska, and then they correctly flew back to San Jose, where they were recaptured, put on a plane, and taken to, where is that?
Maryland.
Thank you, Maryland. And let go there, where they then correctly went back to Alaska and then back to San Jose. And you're sort of like, if you see any researchers coming at you, fly, just fly. Apparently they stopped there. So those are some of the how, and then there's the physical strategies. Some of them are simple, many of them are very hard on the body, and some of them are just boggle the mind. Here are just a few of them. So there's nocturnal migration. Fly all night, land in the morning, eat during the day, grab some sleep where you can. You have less predators, less overheating. My husband and I use that technique when we go down to LA. It's very successful. Let's see, is that more? No. Some birds, like swifts, sleep while they fly. You've probably heard that. They sleep and they're like still flapping. They sleep in short bursts, or they put half of their brain to sleep, and then they put the other half of the brain. And so trade-offs. This particular alpine swift has been proven to fly nonstop for 6 months.
Oh my God.
It's just, yeah, we're getting to the like, oh my gosh.
What does it eat?
On the wing, they eat bugs. So the giant frigate bird here, it flies commonly 10-day nonstop hunting trips. It takes 12-second naps while it's flapping. 12 seconds is a long time. While it's soaring over the ocean or flapping, and sometimes its whole brain is asleep, and sometimes it does the half-half thing. Now, most birds, when they're migrating, work on saving energy in one way or another. I'm sure you've all seen the geese flying at the V's. That saves apparently 20% over if you were doing it alone. So that's a significant one. If you fly different routes, different times of day, different times of the year, that allows them to take advantage of updrafts or favorable wind patterns. Many hawks, herons, and storks use thermals. And thermals are, of course, those warm air rising columns, to ride up like the spiral elevator as far as they can, and then they soar instead of flapping. The thermal soaring strategy is on great display now, September, October, over at Hawk Hill in Marin County. And as many as 30,000 raptors will fly through there and get carried up. And third week of September, in case you're thinking of going, is the best usually, and there can be 1,200 birds a day going up the thermals and on.
Where in Marin is the thermal?
It's called, look up Hawk Hill. It's the Marin Headlands.
There's nothing comparable down here?
As far as a place where they funnel into it, intriguingly, it's not wanting to go to the next thing. I may have to call my tech guy. Wait, maybe I can just do it by hand. So finally, some of the birds store, their strategy is store a huge amount of fuel in the form of fat, and then they flap like heck for a long distance. And when they run out of fat fuel, as they do, they actually start breaking down organs in their body, except for, of course, not the flight muscles, to fuel their flight. So it is little wonder that the birds, when they arrive at their fueling stops, are exhausted and often literally starving as they stop along the way. So, however it is that they do it, when it comes to migration, birds are the undisputed champions in the world. I'd like to share a few examples of what I call migration heroes. We're going to start small with the ruby-throated hummingbird. On the East Coast, it starts losing its flowers in the fall, and even though it only weighs like a couple of pennies, it flies from the eastern U.S. down into Central America about 1,400 miles one way. Some of them actually fly nonstop across the Gulf of Mexico, which is 18 hours. For those of us who think, oh, hummingbirds have to eat every 15 minutes, that's an amazing feat. The rufous hummingbird on our side has the longest migration of any hummingbird, although it's smaller and more ferocious than most hummingbirds. It travels on its one way up to 4,000 miles. If you measure migration in bird lengths, it is the longest migration of any bird. So those two hummingbirds are my first two migration heroes, big, but in a small body. Bar-tailed godwits. Jeez, you read about this and it's like, well, I could go on for this forever, but of course we can't. They sort of look like cute, most of the time when we see them, they're sort of sedentary, they're whatever. But they're the only birds that have been recorded, like literally recorded, to fly over 7,000 miles non-stop. No rest stops, no breaks for food, water, sleep. They can't land on the ocean. They don't stick there. Used to have a bird call, but And so they just fly. They're like doing this for, probably this more likely, for 7 or 8 days straight. Uh-huh.
Do they sleep while they're flying? Like the
They
other
do. They
birds?
do that half brain thing. So they're for 7 or 8 days. Now they have to have a fuel to do this, so they fuel by fat, of course. Huge amounts of fat. They gorge themselves until they double their body weight. They have these layers of fat under the skin. Literally, these are not big birds. Literally an inch of fat all around, and that's not even enough space. So they shrink their intestines and gizzards to make room for more fat. Then they wait for a storm system. Back to problems here. No. Well, whatever. We aren't going to see that anymore. So then they wait for a storm system to come by, or a cyclone. They jump into that storm system or cyclone, and then they fly part of the way to a little bit past the Hawaiian Islands where they don't stop. Then all of a sudden the wind stops, so then they have to do it on their own a lot. And then when they get past the equator, the winds start going to a different direction, so they have to fly into the winds. They arrive down south in New Zealand, obviously emaciated, where they take the next 6 months or so to fatten back up and then fly on back. They are flying from summer to summer also, which is nice, if you like summer. So the bar-tailed godwit, apologies, another is, that weighs like 200 to 600 pounds. Let's see, I'm going to turn this off. But another one, the blackpoll warbler, weighs 12 grams. That's like an empty soda can.
Man.
And
Grams for the first one, right? Not pounds.
did I say pounds? Sorry, that's paying attention to turning this off. All right, thank you. 200 to 600 grams for the godwits. That would be a big bird, huh? Back to the moas. And these guys like 12. They can get enough fat, though, that they can fly 3 days straight over the Atlantic Ocean. They just like go. They've basically digested and gotten rid of a lot of their intestines to save weight. So they have to then eat a high protein diet to like literally sort of regrow their intestines, you know, more, and then they can pack on the pounds for the next parts of the journey. Let's see. So it's the cursor. I keep on losing, and then it also doesn't do
Your cursor is on
arrow.
the other screen, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
Ah, how do you get it off?
take it off to the side.
Okay, there it is.
There it is. So now you're on this.
And it
this
won't let me
screen.
do that either,
But
though.
then you can go here. And select it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sure. That's my long distance at migratory partner. So the Arctic tern can commonly fly 44,000 miles a year, every year. Flies from the North Pole to the South Pole. Many of them live 20 to 25 years, so once you sort of like add that up, they've flown to the moon and back twice. They just recently tracked a bird that went 59,000 years, excuse me, 59,000 miles in 1 year. And just to put that into perspective, the circumference of the Earth is 25,000. It's sort of crazy. Back on. Now, we don't usually get the Arctic tern, but we get sooty shearwaters, who are amazing. They're sort of in a tie. We are graced by their migration through Santa Cruz, and they have a migration of 40 to 45,000 miles every year, a little less than the Arctic tern. They also follow the sun. They arrive at their northern or their southern homes just in time for summer. Interestingly, they also migrate not as flocks, but as individuals. They're only in groups when there's a whole bunch of food in the same area, as there is usually in Santa Cruz, and we see them all flying across and darkening the sky. They are so individual that even two birds from the same nest might end up in Japan or California. And then, of course, they come on back down. They, in addition to being an amazing flyer, they are amazing divers. They prefer to fish close to the surface, but they can dive 224 feet, which is Santa Cruz Boardwalk's double drop twice, or Great America's great drop once. It's huge. I love this one. You know, here's the diver, da 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 da, and then here's the city shearwater, you know, da 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 da, in the water, and this amazing picture. Again, the shearwaters are coming in here and flying around there with the sea lions as well. And that top picture is a picture of Santa Cruz when the sooties are coming on through. So they are totally amazing. Their numbers off of the California coast have declined by 90% in the last 20 years. So we need to figure out how to help them. One of the things is some of the newer fishing techniques are an issue. And they are really only one of many, many, many species that have declined precipitously. Many bird populations have declined 50 to 90%, especially shorebirds, because they're losing their critical refueling habitat areas. Which brings me back to the beginning quote. And now they're dependent on us. So I'm going to turn over to Stephanie in just a second to give you the heads up. Ready? And some of the things that are, I think, from what I'm talking about, that are most important on the migratory shorebirds and stuff are these spots that are those stopover areas that are critical. They're getting demolished in one way or another, so we really need to focus on that. One of the ways is with organizations like Nature Conservancy, Audubon, etc. We're losing a lot of the coastal areas, especially in China, the Yellow Sea. And of course, even in the interior, we're losing a lot of areas, and we need to work on getting those back. And then a couple of other things that we can and are starting to change, which is hopeful. So this bird we will probably see later after Stephanie, and I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
When do we ask questions?
Is it okay if we wait until after Stephanie's, or? Okay.
Margaret, what do you think?
All right.
All right, moderator, yeah, what do you
Yeah,
think?
well, we can throw in questions
Stephanie,
if
do you have
it's not too
questions?
disruptive. Let's see.
Yeah.
Before we
Well,
get
let me work that first.
too much knowledge.
See if I can.
Just-
While he's working it, I can do a good question.
Okay, let's have a few questions here.
So, I read that the Migratory Bird Act protects birds, sounds like from being directly killed.
Stephanie, you should hold on to that until Stephanie speaks, because she's got a lot of information. But yeah, that's incredibly important. That's probably the single most important
My
thing.
question is, has there ever been a case brought to this act that says these birds aren't being directly killed, but if we mess with their refueling territory?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a Stephanie question for sure. They're trying to make it basically currently for even if they are directly being harmed, as long as that wasn't their intention, that's okay.
Wow.
They, like the Trump administration?
Current administration policies, yeah. Uh-huh.
I was wondering how high some of these birds can fly. Do they get to the jet stream, or are there jet streams that get
You know, I
utilized?
don't have those numbers. A lot of them are quite high. For example, you've got the bar-tailed, I think they're bar-tailed geese, no, whatever they are. Anyway, they're flying over the Himalayas. And then I was seeing, which is pretty high. So, and then you, of course, have bird strikes with planes and stuff like that. Some of them are flying low, and they can actually get some of the currents off of the ocean and stuff like that. Are we set?
We're
All right,
set.
I'm going
Thank
to
you.
turn it over to Stephanie.
So I want to go back in time, take us back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. And back then, birds were very popular also, but as a fashion statement for many people, especially in eastern North US and in Europe. It was all the rage for women to have hats that were made of bird feathers, and sometimes they even used whole birds on the hats. So the snowy egret, which we have along our coast here, was actually very prized for this because of its beautiful plumes in the breeding season. Unfortunately, the birds were killed by the thousands. They were easy to kill because they nest in rookeries, in groups, and not necessarily in very high trees. And they would go in, and the poachers would go in, kill the adults for the plumes, leave the babies to die. And even a number of wardens were killed trying to protect the birds. So that's actually it. The egret feathers were worth quite a lot of money. They say that in 1886 they were worth more per pound than gold at the time. So it was quite a bit. There was, obviously there was an uproar also as this became more known. And there were some Boston socialites, there were two women especially, who rallied around this cause. They boycotted the feather trade and eventually shut it down. And it was just in time because the population of egrets had declined by 95%. And that's kind of what it looks like when a species declines by 95%. Go from that many to just that many birds. The National Audubon Society had its start actually in the fight to save the egrets, and it was a couple of years after that, actually it was 1916, when the Migratory Bird Treaty was signed, and 1918 when it became passed by Congress as the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so what is that? It's the nation's actually our strongest conservation law, and it's been in place for 100 years. It made it, there's a lot more words obviously in the actual text, but in essence it made it unlawful to pursue, hunt, capture, kill, or sell the birds that were listed in the act. And it requires common sense practices to prevent bird deaths. There were waivers for certain activities like scientific and educational purposes for Native Americans in ceremonial activities, and for safety reasons, like when flocks of geese were endangering aircraft around an airport, for instance, they would grant a waiver to allow the depredation of the geese. One of the best things that the Migratory Bird Treaty Act did was to provide an incentive for industry to come up with some reasonable practices to prevent bird deaths. It established accountability, the old you break it, you buy it kind of thing. And over the 100 years, it had wide public and bipartisan support in this country. And it was amended a couple of times over the years. It was originally between Canada and Mexico, and then it was expanded to include treaties, part of the treaty with Japan and also Russia. And at this point, it covers about 1,000 species. Some examples of incentives that the Act has done to benefit birds is in areas where they drill oil. They have these waste pits of oil, which from a distance, from the sky, it looks like it's a pool of water. And so the birds, they think it's some safe landing spot, and obviously it's not. But there are reasonable things that could be done, not that expensive, and are being done to cover the oil pits so that the birds don't land there. Power line collisions are another big killer of birds because they don't necessarily see them, but there are ways that they can fix the power lines so that they're more visible and the birds can avoid them. The wind turbine issue is kind of close to home here, over in the, between here and Sacramento, the wind turbines killing thousands of birds, a lot of raptors. But there are people working on how to prevent that. One of the things that I thought was pretty interesting, they're using like a kind of like a facial recognition technology. They can put something on the turbine that will recognize when a bird is coming, and it will turn the turbine off until the bird passes. Like, that's pretty cool. So we can do it. We can protect our birds. So over the 100 years, what good has the Act done? Well, for one thing, we can go off the coast here almost any day of the year. You can see snowy and great egrets here in Santa Cruz. You can see them on the kelp in the ocean. You can see them at many of the lagoons and wetlands up and down the county. They're at natural bridges almost every afternoon, just hanging out there. And these birds were almost gone, and they're back. The wood ducks is this guy here. They're almost always at Mary's Lagoon, and they're a beautiful duck, and yet they were almost extinct. The sandhill cranes we see in the Central Valley here, and again, saved from extinction because of this act. The other thing, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act has held industry accountable, so that when there is a massive kill, for instance, the Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico a couple of years ago, over 1 million birds were killed. Well, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act monies then, the fines that the companies had to pay, went to rehab the oiled birds, which was great for the birds, but it also cleaned up the birds' habitat, the shoreline and the wetlands and so on, restored some of the areas, cleaned the water, which of course cleans the bird food, the fish, and the crustaceans and so on. And in the process, it helped local communities recover from the oil spill, because shrimp and tourism and the fishing and all is such an important part of the people that live there. So the Migratory Bird Treaty Act has helped people as well as helping the birds themselves. And I love this quote by Thomas Lovejoy: "If you take care of the birds, you take care of most of the big problems of the world." And I think this is a good example of that. The other good aspect of the Act is that industry knows what's expected of them. And many industries, many companies have been working with conservation organizations and wildlife resource agencies, government agencies, to develop best practices so that they can be proactive and not kill the birds in the first place. And it's considered one of our most successful conservation laws. And to mark 100 years of the Act, these 4 organizations partnered together to celebrate the benefits of that, to celebrate birds, and to also get more support to protect them. And so, I don't know if you know this, but 2018 is almost over, but it has been the year of the bird. This actually was kind of ironic that this year was chosen to celebrate the year of the bird in a way, because this is also the year that the Migratory Bird Treaty Act is being attacked like it never has been in 100 years. And the 2 biggest threats to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act today are actions of the Department of the Interior, which I'll explain in a minute, and a bill that's been introduced in Congress. Hasn't gone to the floor for a vote yet, but it has been in the Natural Resources Committee, and both of which would severely undermine the provisions of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and put over 950 bird species at jeopardy. So how is the Department of Interior doing this? They have said, this was back in December, that will no longer hold industry accountable for bird deaths unless they set out to deliberately to kill the birds. So if there's an oil spill and birds die, so what? It's only if you go out with the purpose of killing a bird that you would be held accountable. So even if the industries would be absolved from responsibilities, even if it was clear that there would be a substantial loss of birds by the activity, and even if there was an easy fix to prevent the birds from dying. There are some things that we can try and do to offset this. One is we can let our representatives in Congress know that we don't want this bill, especially the amendment that eliminates the protections. We can voice our concerns to the Department of the Interior and administration, and we can continue to get support and tell people how important birds are to ourselves and to our environment. There are a couple of organizations that are specifically working on this. American Bird Conservancy is one, and Audubon is another. And Carol, does your handout have these two links?
I'm checking right now. The first one. And
So if you're interested in writing a letter or whatever, these folks have made it really easy, and they have lots of information about what's happening and the effect on birds.
What is the name of the top organization there? What's ABC Bird stand for?
It's the American Bird Conservancy.
Is this a website that you're showing us?
Yes.
And what is the name of the website?
Well, that's the website, abcbirds.org. But if you put the whole address in, it'll take you directly to the information about the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, as opposed to the home page. There's also a lot of things that we can do on a local level, on a very personal level. Carol mentioned some of them. And actually, all of these could take a whole program in and of itself. So I'll just go through it real briefly. Don't use pesticides or rodenticides. If they kill bugs and rodents, then the birds that rely on them for food are going to get poisoned as well. Keep your cats indoors. Cats are said to kill probably 6 billion birds a year in the United States. The whole outdoor lighting thing is kind of new. A lot of research being done on the effect of how much lighter it is at night now, all the development or cities and so on, and the effect that that's having on birds that are migrating at night especially. They can get confused and disoriented and end up getting turned around or crashing into buildings or whatever. So obviously, safety is an issue, but we don't need to shine our lights up into the sky to be safe. We can focus them downward. A lot of work is being done on that now. Plastic issue has gotten a lot of publicity lately. Just anything we can do to reduce plastic is going to help birds, especially seabirds. And bird-safe window designs, there's a lot of birds collide into windows. I mean, millions every year die. It's just amazing. But there are some designs and some technology that's being developed that doesn't affect the humans looking out the window, but prevents the birds from thinking that there's no window there and from crashing through it. Santa Cruz City recently adopted bird-safe window designs in requirements in the buildings going up along the river. And we want to encourage them, and Bird Club has been doing some work on this, to include it in, adopt it in their, their requirements, their recommendations for getting permits for any new buildings in town.
Does San Lorenzo Lumber sell bird-safe windows?
I do not know that. Sorry.
You know anyone who does?
The more people ask though, the more
Yeah.
likely they'll be there.
And like so many things now, if you went on and just Google bird safe windows, I'm sure you could, find a lot of things. Audubon has a lot of good information on that too. Audubon's website is amazing. It's so easy to get lost on there. There's so much information about anything and everything that affects birds. And then the final thing is to be informed and to vote for candidates who will protect our environment. And I want to end just with this quote from Jonathan Franzen. One reason that wild birds ought to matter, is that they are our last, best connection to a natural world that is otherwise receding. They are the most vivid and widespread representatives of the earth as it was before we got here.
This is the author, local
Yes.
author?
Yes, the local Jonathan Franzen, he's actually a keynote speaker at the Monterey Bay Birding Festival that's coming in a couple weeks. I forget the date exact.
Has he always been a bird advocate? Is this something he acquired after moving to this area, or? 'Cause he's from New York originally, right?
I've read some stuff of his and I can't recall the answer to that question. He was a lead author of a lead article on the January National Geographic, which was devoted to birds, why birds matter, actually.
I think he's a lifelong birder. I've read about him. He's like a fanatic.
Yeah.
Well, he's not writing books, or yes, well, he's writing books.
And I can't remember exactly when he started,
The Monterey
I
Bird
don't know.
Festival,
Yes.
is that coming up soon?
End of September, the last weekend.
Wow.
I don't recall what the date is, 24th maybe, I
Is
don't
that in downtown Monterey?
know. No, it's the Monterey Bay Birding Festival. It's in Watsonville.
I think it's
Oh,
the,
cool.
actually.
Okay.
I think it is the 29th.
28th.
28th through the 30th,
Right. And then we had,
Friday through Sunday.
at Natural Bridges, we had a specific migratory bird day at some day, which I can't even remember what the day was. But we'll be doing that again next year as well.
So general question. Have migratory birds been selectively protected because they're more vulnerable than other birds? And are there similar acts protecting non-migratory birds?
So I don't know exactly why they did it, but part of the reason was because they do go through multiple countries. If the place they're flying to is decimated, they're gone. So part of the thought behind that, I believe, is that we need to recognize that they're going through whole varieties of places. The reason that it first came about, wasn't that mostly, again, for the egrets?
I believe so.
So
A lot of
strikes
birds
me-
have been added to the list of
Yeah.
of birds covered, and like I said, we're over 1,000 species now, so that's pretty much.
what is the opposite of a migratory bird? Are there birds that just stay within like a square mile their whole life? Or?
Yeah, they're called resident birds.
Yeah.
Seagulls.
Well, some seagulls are really migrating too, but
Yeah.
yeah. And interestingly, some of the species, you can get a species where some of them are migrating, and some of them, like Canada geese, they're like, this is just fine, we're just gonna stay. And then they find sometimes that I'll take the Canada geese, I don't know if this is an accurate one, but I can't call one to mind that is. So you might have the ones that are the long distance migrants, and what they do is they leapfrog. So it's like, well, here are the ones in the really nice, they can stay here all the time. The ones up here then go leapfrog over them to go down below. Whereas in other bird species, when they're migrating, it's like there might be sort of a sliding, like these ones go to here, the ones that are here go to there, the ones that are there go to there. and then they all slide back up.
Don't California Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife regulations protect most birds or harassing birds?
I believe that is mostly just the migratory, isn't it? So I guess I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
There's a distinction for game birds are carved out as being,
And I
having
think
best
just
protection.
in general, I'm not clear on it, I haven't looked specifically, but for most other organisms that are wildlife,
Mhm.
there are laws in place to protect them.
Also, I know that, I mean, I had to have a dead bird permit if I wanted to pick up a dead bird, which is good because that disallows somebody from like shooting a whole bunch and then saying, oh, I just happened to find these dead birds here and I'm just taking them with me. And I know that you had to have it for pretty much, and I thought it was all migratory birds, but I know that it did not include like house sparrows, given that they're non-natives, and starlings and a few others.
I think we have
An expert
someone
back
who
in the
knows
back?
a little more about
Cool.
the fish and game.
Yeah, as far as California Department of Fish and Wildlife goes, they have a certain group of birds, mostly raptors, that are called sensitive species, or fully protected species, actually. And those birds are protected under the state law. And then there are, of course, endangered or threatened species, which are only a very few birds. So most of the birds in California are protected not by state law, but by the federal, or they used to be protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and they're not protected by that anymore. But the California game wardens often use the federal laws to enforce incidents in California. They work together, they used to.
So again, to clarify, does the treaty extend to Central America and South America?
No, it just goes Canada, Mexico, the US, Japan, and Russia.
Great Britain also had another, I don't know the name of it, but I was seeing a lot of people talking about it, some other treaties that they have for their long-distance migrants, but it's not with us.
How many of the migratory birds are rapists and murderers?
I'm sure they escape from jail regularly and come on over, yeah. Jailbirds, yeah, I like that.
Yes.
Yeah, so you mentioned windmills, and I would imagine that the smaller birds can somehow manage to follow the wind currents and avoid being hit by the blade, but the larger birds, like eagles, are being, decimated by wind turbines, by these vanes. But in addition to that, we've got these solar concentrators.
Oh my gosh.
Where they have mirrors that reflect sunlight over several square miles towards the central heating point. And birds that fly into that zone just get fried.
Just get fried, literally.
Yet if instead of having wind turbines and solar concentrators, we had nuclear reactors, it would take up a tiny bit of land area and would be completely safe and clean and carbon-free. I know you guys don't like
And no
nuclear.
downside.
That is,
Hadn't heard about the safe.
A lot
Maybe
safer.
safer for birds.
yeah, no, it's, everything has their pluses and minuses. So I suspect a lot of people were thinking of some of the minuses to weigh with that too, but those would certainly be some of the pluses. On that light thing, there was an interesting study because people are like, so there's a light shining up in the, why would that disrupt migrating birds? And they had a great opportunity to study that with, I think it was a memorial for 9/11, I think.
9/11 memorial
And they had
where
this,
they just
huge
screwed
light.
it.
And then there was this time where they would turn it off. And so now we can see a lot of migrating birds on radar. And so they were like, how many birds, they were using, I think, radar and some other things, how many birds are circling around this light? And then they turned it off, and then they measured the number of birds, and it was like gone, and all the birds were like, okay, now we're going where we should be going. So they had a really great way to measure and quantify that, yeah, that makes a huge difference. So now, of course, then we enter into the, well, what are we going to do about it? But you have to have the information first. And then on I think one of the pictures I had showed just these piles of dead birds, some of the, during migration with the nice glassy windows and everything, the night migrants especially are coming on through and they never know what hits them. And then people are like, wow, why are all these really pretty birds dead on the sidewalk here? And they've run into it. So again, as they're starting to be more aware, quantify it, they're starting to work on things that are helping, to make it so it's more visible to the migrating birds.
Are there any hot spots in town? What about the radio antennas on the south side there?
I don't have any local information. I don't know. I don't know.
Repairmen can't walk up on those antennas.
Mm-hmm.
Get knocked off themselves, so.
Yeah, I haven't heard of any major bird kills because of things like that in Santa Cruz.
And Santa Cruz would be one of those places where you would hear about that in general, I would think, but.
Well, we'd like to end up by taking a few minutes to tell you about a migratory bird which is coming here for the winter. Everyone familiar with the golden crowned sparrow? And you want to go ahead and play?
Yeah. I'm a great advocate of, you walk someplace, there's birds everywhere and you don't see any of them. But you know they're there because they have their calls. And if you know their calls, you can go, oh, there's a so-and-so and so-and-so. And you have this I get this mental picture of, there's the phoebe, there's this. And you never see any of them. So this is a very easy one. So we're going to teach you a call so that any day now, when these guys are dropping out of the sky,
20 minutes. If you need a library card,
I can hear a call and I recognize that that's Leonard, male, and you might even recognize who. I'll use that opportunity to hook up.
So these guys, these little sparrows, they've been coming back. The earliest was, I think, about the 7th of September, but more towards the end of September. And they'll be here until anywhere from mid-April to early May. They spend the winter here. And then in the summer, where they go to breed is in Alaska. And they've, that you've heard about radio transmitters being put on birds and little backpacks and stuff. Well, they have finally, the technology has come that they've been able to miniaturize the transmitters enough that they can safely put them on these little birds and track them. And so there's actually people up at the university who are doing studies, been studying these birds for years, but in the last couple of years they've been able to put radio or GPS tags on them. So they have to capture the bird back in order to get the data, but it's better than nothing. And so what they're finding is that the birds that spend the winter here spend a winter in the same area, about 100 by 100 yards maybe, in small flocks. And then when they go off to breed, they all go off to breed in different areas, different parts of Alaska. And one study that was done by PRBO up in Marin, they had tracked 4 birds, and they spanned everywhere the Alaska Peninsula from like here all the way up to Anchorage and over to here. And the distance was the same distance as the length of California. They came from the same area in Marin, and they spread out to breed. There was no overlap at all in their breeding territory. And they all came back to the same place in the winter. And the same thing with our birds. They're all coming back to the same area. And so they have their winter buddies and they have their breeding buddies. And they don't connect. It's kind of interesting. But go ahead, play the call.
So part of the reason why you have your piece of paper, besides having websites that you can go to if you're interested about things, and also because of the cool, amazing, they have this new thing of migration forecast. It's like, I don't know, is it going to be a high migration day tomorrow? Let's find out. and it, you know, forecast for the next 3 days, and you can see on it if there's a lot of migration or not, or what's the direction, etc. And then they also have a live, what happened last night with the radar, you can actually see the migration directions and patterns. So very cool. So besides that, we wanted you to have a piece of paper so you could use a pen or pencil and write down the golden crown sparrow, what the song sounds like to you as a teacher. When you write it down, it gets into your brain more. So if you have a pen or pencil, if you want to, it's very easy to write down. It sounds like, oh dear me. You can write, oh dear me. And it's a whistle, so it's a very thin line. So it's like, so there's like 3 different sections. When I draw like dee, 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 and then you can write, oh dear me under it. Sometimes you had a great poem, but I didn't put it on there. Sometimes they're like, oh. Or you might get an oh dear. But sometimes you get the whole oh dear me. And they'll be coming in soon, and if you listen for that, in the bushes, you'll hear these things. So here's the call. There's sort of 2 sets of calls you'll hear in there. There's the oh dear me, which will be unmistakable, and then there'll be a little beep, 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 and so they're sort of twittering and talking to each other. Ignore that part, because that's more complex. But here's the oh dear me. It has that same oh dear me. Ooh. Do it a couple more times. So sometimes you might just hear that. Last one.
Funny story on this is that up in Alaska, they sing a whole lot more because it's breeding time. And it said that the miners back in the, whenever that was, 1800s, when the Klondike, and they were going up looking for the gold, and you know, they're trudging along, and these birds would be singing every couple hundred yards. Should be these birds would singing, and they said that it was, they used to call the bird Weary Willie because it sounded like it was kind of tired. But they also thought that what they heard it singing was no gold here. Over and over.
They were pretty tired.
It's kind of demoralizing, probably.
Yeah, probably. So I think, is that it for you on the studies?
Well, I just had something, just an interesting tidbit on the migration of these birds is that it takes them, on average, about 29 days to go north in the spring, but it takes them about 53 days to come back. So they're in a hurry to get there and start their family, but they kind of take their time coming back for the winter, and along the coast in both cases. So if you go up north visiting, you may see some of our birds working their way down.
That's not due to the wind currents? A difference in time for the different trips?
I don't think so. Because with a lot of birds, it's that way. They just seem to go north faster.
Maybe they're better fed too.
Could be, yeah.
I remember hearing that bird early morning, especially. I don't know if it's quieter then and more noticeable, but is that, are you more apt to hear it in the early morning or not necessarily?
That's more commonly when I hear it.
Yeah, I think as a general rule, you tend to hear more birds, more vocal early.
No.
I got it.
Do you know if it's a nocturnal migrator? I don't know.
You know, I didn't come across that piece of information.
A lot of times when birds are doing, I hear that, especially the nocturnal migrators, is they come down, they're flying along, they drop to the ground, and then they're in a new place. And so you sort of have to like stake your claim. So I hear that a lot of them, they'll come down, and then when the morning hits, they're like, I'm here, you know, it's my area right now, or at least right now. So I wonder if that's partially, or I've reached my place where I always come, I'm here, better not be anybody else who's, you know.
Or it might be saying, hey, my buddy's here yet?
Yeah, that's true, that's true.
Are you here yet?
Hey guys.
I'm here, are you here?
Yeah.
These the birds that end up in Alaska, I mean, you said they come from one place where they eat. They're eating here locally, right?
Well, they spend the winter
Foraging,
here.
yes. And then they go to breed in Alaska. But they're going to different places. So, and assuming that these other places they go are being populated from birds from other foraging locations, other wintering locations. So, or summering, what do they call it? So, they're breeding and they're mixing their genes. So, what determines which ones of their brood come to Santa Cruz versus some other location? Do you know that?
Well, I think that everyone hopes that someday we'll know that kind of information. But we're just really, with these birds especially, we're just really barely beginning to get into some of this information. The areas that they breed in are pretty remote and hard to get to. Like I say, we just only in the last about 2 years have had the transmitters that we could put on and follow their migration and find out where our birds were going to breed. So there's just a whole lot more information.
Or is it elders that lead them back here?
You know, I just don't think that's known for this particular species at this time. I know there's people doing DNA studies on the birds up in the Arboretum
Okay,
and stuff. but-
another question is,
to the elders.
have genetics ever been shown to provide enough information to find a summering location? Just genetics? You mean if they're bred in isolation?
You mean
released
if-
somewhere in the world, will they find just by their genes where their parents summered?
Lineage.
You mean with any bird?
Yes. Has that ever been shown?
Oh.
Like
I can't
23andMe.
imagine that there would be like a locational marker, because with 23andMe, they're looking at groups that had been known to traditionally be there. Do your genes match their genes? So to do that, what you would have to be able to do is have a whole bunch of researchers go to Alaska and then take a whole lot of DNA samples there, so they knew what those populations in, say, Western Alaska versus Eastern Alaska, what those genetic populations were, and then you could test the birds here and say, ooh, this genetics matches very closely with this one. But I think, and Stephanie can speak to that more, that it's like, we don't have, especially because it's so dispersed, we don't have a lot of researchers going all throughout Alaska and getting that data.
Well, now there is some work that has been done recently with some other birds, I don't think with these sparrows, where they can take a feather from a bird and do a radioisotope study and be able to identify which region of the world that they grew that feather in. So
From what they were eating.
from what they were eating and the chemical composition. This is all behind me, how they do that, but
True.
there's
Hair-
definitely
hair
a
and-
lot of technology, a lot of science is working on getting these answers.
Just to elaborate on that, I think I've heard of studies where they've actually taken eggs of some pelagic birds that breed on ocean islands, and they've actually taken an egg, keeping it viable, and they've moved it like to the east coast of the U.S. or something, reared the bird, released it, and then these birds forage at sea for several years, and when they're old enough to breed, they go back to certain islands. And so these egg hatched birds in the U.S. went back to the islands where the eggs came from. So
Do you know
there's
what-
some genetic marker in there that's telling them where to go.
And that might be true for some species and not for others.
Yes, it may not be true for all species.
Do you know what species that was?
I feel like it was an albatross, I'm not really certain.
Plus, it could be socially accountable. They're interacting with other birds of their species during their adolescence, too.
Well, there's such diversity of birds. You can find a bird that does almost anything, a variety, some are monogamous, some are polygamous, et cetera, just on the way. Some are good parents, some are bad parents. There's just no end to the variety of birds and what they can do.
Yeah, on a real small scale, not on a 1,000-mile migration scale, but there are birds, like, for example, in our local forest, we have a bird called the marbled merlet, which is a seabird that nests inland in trees. And so we know that those chicks, when they finally fledge the nest, they do it strictly on their own. There are no other birds around to guide them, and they know which direction to fly. They know to go to the ocean. Okay, so there's some, genetic component in there. It's instinctual of which way to go, even though there's no one there to lead them, or teach them, or anything like that.
Birds are amazing.
Well, great. I just want to thank everyone. We give a couple minutes. We have some refreshments, and you can take a look at the nice exhibits up here that our speakers have brought. And I think
plug for the bird club.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I mean, if the only thing you do coming out here tonight is go online and join the Santa Cruz Bird Club. You will find enough resources there to entertain you for years. And then from there, you can go to these websites. I mean, the world of birds is an endless place, and we live in an area where you can enjoy them. Just do what I do, sit on your front porch with a glass of wine every night, and you will get to know your birds. And you'll be pretty amazed how many birds just show up. And now I know this is one of my favorite birds, and every year I thought, did they not like my bird seed? What happened? Why do they always leave me? But they do leave, and I'm so excited they're coming back this month. Well, anyway, big hand for our speakers. And thank you to the library and Museum of Discovery, and please enjoy the information.
There's some paper cups there. I'll need to throw the coffee out if you've got a drink it. So